Well, we were all jumping right in to say something.
Kind of sarcastic, but. All right, what was going on last week?
Jesus was teaching.
Okay.
As always. And he was kind of warning that death could come at any time. And we need to be prepared by repentance.
That's right.
And he has the parable of the fruit tree.
Mm-hmm.
Was 3 years old and had no fruit, but the gardener said, give it a little bit more time, and then the next year, after some good care and fertilizer and cultivation, it bears fruit.
Well, he said if it bears fruit, good. If not,
Dig it up.
yep,
Get rid of it.
curtains for the tree. So it's this warning from Jesus. They have time, but it's not indefinite. And they need to take the opportunity that they have and repent. Things are more urgent than some of them realize. Yeah. All right, anything else from last week?
He healed a woman in the synagogue.
Mm-hmm. And how did that go over?
They don't like him. Made the Pharisees very mad.
Do you remember what the synagogue ruler did?
It was better for her to wait another day. She needed to come on, not do it on Sunday, she needed to come and do it Monday, because there
Yeah.
are 7 days in the week. And it was appalling.
Yeah, and he criticized the people, not
Yeah.
Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I think he knows he's out of his league, but he is trying to assert his authority, and Jesus is just not having that. How does Jesus respond to that comment?
He tells him that he does his work on any day of the week, the Sabbath or whatever, so why should this woman wait for her?
And it's not just doing work, it's releasing
Everything.
somebody from bondage, right?
Right.
Because he uses the example of the animals, of releasing their animals so they can lead them out to water. If it's right for their animals to be released on the Sabbath day, why is it not right for this woman to be released? Of course it is. They're being hypocrites by keeping the people in bondage and treating their animals better than them.
And she didn't even seek him out.
No, she didn't.
He drew her out.
That's right. I mean, Jesus did it. He took the initiative in all of that because he was provoking that response.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, what else? Anything else from last week?
He addressed the grain of mustard seed.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite story.
Yes.
Yes.
And what was he using that illustration for?
The kingdom of God.
That's right. So he uses this picture of the mustard seed and the yeast as well. It might have meager beginnings, but how big is it going to grow?
Can I say something? Somebody gave me once, and I don't have it anymore, a mustard seed on a card, and they are so tiny. They're like the top of a pin.
I have one in the necklace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they grow
With
to
the
be
ball.
very
I
large.
had one.
Yeah.
I can bring some next week from my garden.
Where I lived in California, after the lake would go
I
down.
never saw one before, Sally.
Yeah.
The reservoir, the water would go down, it collects when there's runoff, spring runoff from the mountains, comes down and fills the reservoir, and then when it would all get used by the farmers, all the water, there would be mustard everywhere, wild mustard. But you said that the mustard that grows in that region is different?
It's bigger,
Bigger.
like more like the size of a small tree.
Pretty yellow and, and green and.
Where was this?
California.
So you think about this tiny, tiny, tiny seed and how big it grows, and then you think about that in terms of the kingdom of God.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, where does Jesus tell this parable? He's on the other side of the world, and here we are talking about it. I mean, it's amazing how much the kingdom of God spreads, but Jesus said it would be that way, and nothing's going to stop it. They're going to kill him, and that's not going to stop it, right? The kingdom's going to grow, and God is going to make it grow the way that he pleases. Okay, anything else from last week?
You better be on the right side of the door when it closes,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
because it will open back up.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And then, remember the Pharisees came and warned Jesus about Herod and And Jesus was just not all that impressed. He's like, Herod,
So,
doesn't really matter. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and he's not the one who's in control. And then he made that sarcastic comment, and anyway, I can't die outside of Jerusalem, can I? And then, do you remember how the chapter ended? It wasn't with that kind of sarcasm. Do you remember how it ended?
Sorrows over Jerusalem.
Yeah, that he's just weeping over them because he knows what's coming. He knows what's coming for the city. He knows what's coming for the people because they're rejecting their own Messiah. And actually that stands in the background of then what happens today. The religious leaders are going to keep up this opposition to Jesus, but Jesus loves his enemies. And that doesn't just mean that he loves, tax collectors and sinners and us. He does, but he loves the Pharisees too. And this chapter, he's actually going to hold out the opportunity to the religious leaders to turn away from what they're doing and to accept his invitation. Okay, any last things you want to mention before we read the next chapter? Okay, so let's look at chapter 14. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from dropsy. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him away. Then he asked them, "If one of you has a son or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull him out?" And they had nothing to say. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, "Give this man your seat." Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, "Friend, move up to a better place." Then you will be honored in the presence of all your fellow guests. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Then Jesus said to his host, "When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or relatives, your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." When one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the man who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.' The servant came back and reported this to the master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' 'Sir,' the servant said, 'what you ordered has been done, but there is still room.' Then the master told his servant, 'Go out to the roads and the country lanes and make them come in, so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those men who were invited will get a taste of my banquet.' Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And anyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundation and is not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, "This fellow began to build and was not able to finish." Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Will he not first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It is thrown out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Okay, so how does the chapter open in verses 1 and 2?
He went to eat again in the Pharisee's house.
Yes. Everything that happens in verses 1 to 24 is at the same meal. And those verses, 1 to 24, are intended to be read as a unit because it's all one scene at one table. So we've got 4 scenes actually that all happen around the lunch table, because we get the lunch table where Jesus is, and then the 3 parables that all happen, everything is connected to a banquet table. And the theme of the previous section is continuing here, that Jesus is challenging the Jews' understanding of the kingdom of God. So what we're going to see is what should have been a setting for social hospitality toward Jesus is actually characterized by hostility toward him and toward his message. But Jesus is going to turn things around. He's actually going to offer kingdom hospitality to the religious leaders if they have ears to hear. Okay, so he goes to eat in the house of this prominent Pharisee, and what does Luke add in verse 1 about this situation?
It's 7 days.
So it's the Sabbath,
And they're watching.
him. Why would they be watching him?
See what he says next.
And to see if he breaks any of their laws.
Yes.
Is it weird that they're having a feast on Sabbath?
No.
They're making people work.
No. Well, it depends on if the preparation was done the day before, which it
Oh.
typically would have been. Yeah.
But someone had to put it on the table. It's more like
Well, you just have to carry. Well, the command of the Old Testament does not allow women to do work on the Sabbath either. I'm guessing that you just get it down to small enough plates that you can carry the weight without it breaking their tradition. Basically, they said you can carry stuff as long as it's not too heavy. So you just have to make extra trips, I guess. I don't know.
Buffet, they put
Anyway.
it on a buffet.
the day before.
Yeah.
They're having cold cuts.
They're having cold cuts, that's right. They're having cold lamb, that's right. Okay, now,
Pulled lamb, is that what you said?
maybe they're just eating vegetables, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, it's not pulled pork, that's for sure. Okay, so what does he say in verse 2? What does Luke tell us?
There was a man with dropsy, and what the heck is dropsy?
It's an edema, which is, it's an abnormal swelling of the body. It's fluid retention that
Okay.
gives you an abnormal swelling. Yeah. So it's a very visible kind of ailment. Now, here's the thing. Some people try to give the Pharisees the benefit of the doubt right here and assume this is an incident, just an innocent coincidence. I, however, am of a more cynical bent. I think that Luke is making a point when he immediately follows the comment about Jesus being watched by the mention of the sick man right there in front of him. I don't think that man just happens to be there, and I don't think he just happens to have an ailment that everybody can see. I think it's a setup. I think this pretense of hospitality is an attempt by the Pharisees to trap Jesus into breaking their tradition by healing somebody on the Sabbath. You know how predictable Jesus is about this sort of thing, right? And this scene is a pair with the one that came in chapter 13 with the woman. Okay, we're just getting a rerun of what happened with the woman, because Jesus' mercy it's so predictable, they are banking on it. So I think they're watching him with a plan, because they've got this guy there and they're waiting to see what Jesus is going to do. So what does he do in verses 3 and 4?
He puts it in their face.
Is
Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?
He hasn't even done anything yet.
I know he's done it so many times, and they're still doing it.
It's like they think they can ambush him, but they can't. I mean, he knows what's going on. And instead of sidestepping that trap and just carrying on, he stops. He puts their wrong thinking on display right there in front of everybody. He calls it out. He's the one taking the initiative right here. So he asks the Pharisees and the law experts if it's lawful to heal on the Sabbath. In their tradition, I mean, you know this already, they wouldn't allow someone to receive medical treatment, which was considered work on the Sabbath, unless their condition was immediately life-threatening. But that's their tradition. And we know that tradition actually undermines God's purpose for the Sabbath, which is to give people a day of freedom and rest from their work, because he does work on their behalf. In actual fact, there's no better day than the Sabbath for Jesus to heal somebody, because healing is a physical illustration of a Sabbath reality, that God is freeing you from something you can't free yourself from. Now, when he asks that question, how do the Pharisees and the law experts respond? They don't say anything. What one of the writers I read said, it's a non-cooperative silence. It's a challenging silence. It's a silence that says, step into the trap and then see what we think. And Jesus does. That's exactly what he does next. So he forces the issue. What does he do?
He heals him.
He takes hold of the man, he heals him, and then he sends him on his way. Now, I find that interesting that the man, again, I'm not sure he was intended to be a real guest at this banquet. But here's Jesus kind of getting him off the scene, because now everything he's going to do after this is dealing with those religious leaders. The man has had his healing, but these religious leaders, there's a problem right here. So think about last week and this week. Now we've got two witnesses, a man and a woman, who are both testimonies to the fact that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. Not because he claims to be, but because he has the power and the authority to heal somebody in a way nobody else does. The man doesn't even have to say anything. He had a visible ailment, and he walks out fixed. It's a very clear walking testimony. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath.
Which really isn't work and medical treatment. The Pharisees either were deliberately blinding themselves to this point or bending their law, because their law would have, or their rules would have been, I can't treat you. Jesus isn't treating him. He's healing him. Did the Pharisees have some rule that said if a prophet has miraculous power in healing, he's not allowed to do it on the Sabbath?
I think it still works.
Yes, but it's miraculous. I mean, how
But
are
that's
they
not
missing
registering for them,
How are
right?
they missing the miracle
We
part?
see it over and over and over that they're seeing miracles. And it's not registering who it is, who Jesus has to be to do the things that he's doing. Because it's not a lack of evidence that's the problem, it's their pride. Right? That's what's getting in the way of them recognizing who Jesus is. What does he say to them? I mean, he could have just kept quiet after that, but he doesn't. What does he say to them in verses 5 and 6?
If one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out?
Of course you would, right?
Mhm.
I mean, imagine if you had a kid who fell in a deep pit, on the Sabbath. Would you be like, hang tight, I'll come back tomorrow? No! Like to get you out, but it's the wrong day, so just spend the night there, we'll get you out. That's stupid, nobody would ever do that. I mean,
Tread water, and that would be great.
it's like, your kid, your animal, it's ridiculous. What's the difference between that and what Jesus just did? All he did was rescue a man from the medical pit that he was in. But the Pharisees, their whole thing is what's permitted on the Sabbath. Jesus is asking what's intended for the Sabbath. And from his perspective, healing this man is not just permitted, it's required on the Sabbath. I mean, the Sabbath is the day for people to be released from bondage. And that's what Jesus is doing. Now, when he asks that, how do they respond?
They're quiet again.
And this time, I think it's because they're cornered and they know it. There's nothing they can say in response to Jesus. So you have this Sabbath day dinner party filled with guests who are proud, self-centered, hypocritical, and now they're just silent. Now, if it were me, I would have said, I get the feeling I'm not really welcome here, so I'm going home. But that's not Jesus. He isn't finished, not by a long shot. In fact, now he's going to take on the bondage of the religious leaders. He's going to offer them a way to get out of the pit that they're in. Here's the thing. Isn't there something wrong if you would rather have a man suffer for another day than see him get relief on the Sabbath? Don't you feel the misery of being slaves to man-made requirements? There's just something really wrong when Jesus even has to ask the question of verse 3. But these men suffer from a worse bondage than the man did. The problem isn't that they're sticklers for, their traditions. The problem is that they are so opposed to Jesus, they can't see what's happening right in front of them. And that's a bondage only God can break.
Somebody told me once, I talked to a man that was Jewish, and he said, the law said working on the Sabbath and you could be stoned, you could be killed. And he said, so they set up boundaries around that so that you wouldn't get too close to breaking that.
The problem is that they then set up boundaries around the boundaries, and then boundaries around the boundary. And they set up so many things so that you would never get to that point of breaking that law. But as you said, they fenced themselves in all of these rules. They just created barriers for themselves.
And they're fencing the people in.
Yep.
So that now it's to the detriment of the people. Because here's the thing, if you think that this is what the law of God requires, that you are not allowed to get loose of a physical bondage on the Sabbath day, how does that, what do you then start to understand about God?
He's mean.
That you're a big sinner and that God is cursing you.
Well, and that you can't get freedom if it's not the right day of the week, right? I mean, what kind of God is that who will only give you your freedom if you come on the right day?
Well, and it's what you said, what better day would there be to
This
be
is the
healed
day
than
for it.
the Sabbath?
Because the Sabbath, not just the day, but the year and the year of Jubilee, the whole idea of Sabbath is that's when the debts get canceled. That's when the bondage is done away with. That's when God does on your behalf what you could never do for yourself. There is no better day for it, but I mean, it's not just that they're making rules that are so impossible to keep. It's that they're misrepresenting God when they do it. So that, if you don't have access to the law, you look at these fences they've put up and you think, oh, look at who God is. He's merciful, but not too merciful. Because, come on this day of the week or don't expect freedom. That's not who God is. And I think Jesus takes that personally because of who he is. They're misrepresenting him when they do this. Okay, now, what happens next? He's going to give these 3 parables now, and all of this is directed toward the religious leaders and their bondage. So, what happens next in 8 to 11?
He talks about being invited to a wedding feast and taking not the best seat, but the worst seat.
That's
Because
right.
you can always move up, but it's humiliating to move down.
And why is he telling them that parable? What are they doing?
Taking the best thing.
Yeah, he's observing the other guests at this meal, and he notices that they're picking the places of honor. Now that's very interesting, because typically it would have been the host who decided where the guests would recline at the meal. And the seats nearest the host were the ones that had the most honor attached to them. So that means if you walk into a banquet like this, the seating arrangement itself demonstrates a very visible pecking order. Now, at this particular meal, what's interesting is that instead of waiting for the host to seat them, the guests are actually taking the seats of honor for themselves. I mean, if you were the hostess, you'd be like, what do you think you're doing? Like, right? That's what I tell you.
I suppose they're trying to get away from Jesus and out of the uncomfortableness of discussions.
I don't know. I think they're trying to put themselves next to whoever makes them look good. And so, they're picking the seats where I don't want to sit next to that person. I want to sit next to that person because that's the person with the honor. Now, by the way, you notice what's happening with Jesus right here. At the beginning of the chapter, the Pharisees and the law experts were watching and evaluating Jesus. But now, who is it who's watching who? Jesus is now the one watching all of them. He's the one evaluating all of them. He's not looking to see if they'll break some man-made traditions. He's looking to see what their actions reveal about their hearts. So interesting how quickly Jesus can turn the tables. And here's the thing, again, the man who was in physical bondage from the edema, he was freed and he's gone home. But the people present at that meal are in a far more serious bondage than he was. There is a deep spiritual bondage that's playing out right in front of Jesus, and he's confronting it. He's going to get at the issue underneath the issue. So he tells this parable, really he's just pointing out the obvious to the guests, which is putting yourself forward as someone worthy of honor is not only presumptuous, it's risky. Because if you go to a banquet and pick a seat of honor for yourself, who's to say the host won't come along and say, I'm sorry, get up and make way for somebody more important than you? And being demoted in front of everybody is going to be humiliating. Now, of course, that's what you get for assuming that you're all that. But, take the least important seat, and then who's to say the host won't come and move you up, and then you're going to be honored in front of everybody. So much better to come to the meal with humility instead of with pride. Now, at first glance, it might appear Jesus is just giving people good advice about, social niceties and how to avoid humiliation at a dinner party. And it is good advice. But Luke calls this a parable, which means that it's a metaphor for something else. And we get a hint of what the something else is in verse 11, because that's where Jesus gives the punchline. What does he say right there?
Those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted.
Now wait, are we still talking about dinner parties? What are we talking about? The kingdom of God. That's right. We've graduated to something more profound than where you're seated at a banquet. That sort of reversal of situations Jesus just described, that the higher brought low and the lower raised up, that's something we've seen over and over and over in Luke, starting with the songs of Zechariah and Mary. And when it talks about being humbled or being exalted, the hint is it's not the host of the banquets that are doing that, it's God. This parable is ultimately about how people relate to God, whether we approach him with pride or with humility. This is the number one issue that keeps the religious leaders in bondage. And this is what motivates them to keep other people in bondage: pride. That is the problem that's playing out all over this dinner party. And the thing is, if you don't deal with the root of pride, the bondage doesn't end. Jesus is going to get at the pride that keeps them captive, and he's going to offer them a way out if they'll listen. Now, one of the things that's interesting to think about right here with this parable is you don't deal with the root of pride by just taking the lowest seat or going to the back of the line or whatever. Because, you can go to the back of the line not because you're humble, but because you want to look humble, right? You can go to the back of the line because you want everybody to think that you're humble, not because you really are. How do you deal with the root of pride and not just the symptom? Well, we're going to come back to that in a minute. Now, what does Jesus say then to the host of this dinner party in verses 12 to 14?
Go and invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed.
Mm-hmm.
Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous.
Now, I expect the host was listening to Jesus confronting all of those guests, and he's probably nodding his head in agreement about those people who just decided to seat themselves wherever they want. But after watching and evaluating the guests, Jesus now then turns and evaluates the host himself. And he tells this man, when he hosts a meal, don't invite his friends, his family, or his rich neighbors. Why not? Because reciprocation shouldn't be the goal. People in his circles with his same social status can return the favor. And actually, that was a fundamental cultural assumption of the people then. When you had a big dinner party like this, one of the purposes in doing that was you invite the right people, then you get invited to the right banquets. That's how you network. That's how you get standing and status. That's how, you want to make sure that you're in the company of people who can help you out. And so people used hospitality a lot to secure their position in the community. You intentionally invite the people that you do because of how it can help you. So think about what the host then is doing, or what Jesus is implying that he's doing. In the same way that the guests were picking seats that made them look good, the host has picked guests who make him look good. Right? Who has he invited to this party? But the people who can, make him look good and help him out.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus says, reciprocation, put that to the side. That goes out the window. Because that's not real hospitality. If you're inviting people who can do you favors, who are you serving? Yourself, right? You're not serving them. You're serving yourself, which looks like hospitality, but it's not. So if you come to it with humility, that actually opens up a whole new list of possible dinner guests. So Jesus tells this Pharisee, it's interesting what he says. He could have said, invite people you've never met, or invite people who are different from you, or invite people you don't like. But he doesn't. Instead, what he says is invite the poor and the crippled, the lame and the blind. Why? Because they can't reciprocate. They can't pay you back. They can't come back later and do you any favors. Now, Jesus' point in this whole situation is not to say, don't invite your family and friends over to meals. What he's saying is, it's possible to use hospitality to serve your own self-interests. And that's exactly what this host is doing. Hospitality that's sincere and generous is done for the sake of the other person, with no expectations, no payback, and no strings attached. And what will the result be if you do that?
Blessings.
Yeah, blessing from who?
God.
From God, right? Blessings and a future reward, which is far better than whatever payback you would get in this life from inviting the right people. Being included in the resurrection of the righteous means you have eternal blessings to look forward to that far outweigh whatever you pay out in this life. Okay, now, just like with the previous parable, it is possible to invite people who can't reciprocate and then post it on Facebook in order to make sure everybody knows how generous you are. People do this all the time, don't they?
Yes.
I mean, there have been a few times when I've seen celebrities who, you know, they go volunteer at a soup kitchen in LA, and you're like, wow, that's great, except then you realize, but you saw it in People magazine. I mean, that's the thing, is they're doing things that make them look good, or things that make them feel good, or things that make them feel like I'm a good person. How do you deal with the root of pride and not just as symptoms? How do you get to a point where you do this, not because you want to look good, but because you really want to serve the interests of the other person? Well, we'll come back to that in just a minute. Now, when Jesus mentions the resurrection of the righteous, one of the other table guests hears that and decides to throw in his 2 cents. So what does he say in verse 15?
Blessed. Go ahead.
Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm. So that comment actually sets the stage for the climactic parable, which is the third one that's coming next. Now, it's an uncontroversial statement, but here's the thing. We know from what Jesus says in the parable that there's an assumption this man is making when he says that. And the assumption is that he and his dinner companions are going to be at that banquet. I don't think he has any doubt. He's just taking for granted that he and the other people who are there, that they're worthy of the invitation of God, and they're going to have a seat at the feast in God's kingdom. And Jesus is actually going to challenge that assumption with the parable that he tells next. So, how does he open the parable in verse 16?
A certain man was preparing a great banquet, invited many guests.
Mm-hmm. And you notice in this parable there's a double invitation, which would be commonplace then because, you know, they don't have phones. So you send out an invitation, you tell people, you know, they're invited to this banquet. If they accept, you count them, you know, you count the RSVP, and then you start making preparations. And when the preparations are done, then you get back to them and you say, okay, the banquet's ready, come. And so that's what he does, sends out these invitations, and then when the time comes, sends out his servant to tell all the invitees the banquet's ready, and what happens?
They start turning him down.
Yeah, they stand him up. One by one, they start making excuses. Well, what are their excuses?
They got married.
Mm-hmm. What's the first one?
He bought a field.
I had to go look at it.
Now, hang on.
He was
What do you
going
think
to
about
say-
that?
Wouldn't you look at it before you bought it?
You surely
Yeah.
would, wouldn't you?
Mhm.
And anyway, is the field going anywhere?
No, will always
Okay.
be there.
So what do you think about that excuse?
It's pretty lame.
It's pretty lame. It is. And what's the next one?
He bought 5 yoke of oxen,
Mm-hmm.
and he's going to try them out.
He's taking them for a test drive. Now, again, would you not do that before you buy them?
Mhm.
And anyway, aren't they going to be there tomorrow? Why do you have to do that right now? Why can't you do it later? Okay, and then what's the third one?
I just got married.
What do you think about that?
Bring his wife.
He's using his wife as an excuse,
Yes.
right? And even, okay, bring her with you. Or if you can't, can she not do without you for a few
Yeah.
hours? You know, property, work, family, they're the main preoccupation of people's lives. Right here, they're the excuses that people use when they don't really want to come. I mean, you've done this, haven't you? When you're like, I don't really want to do that. What could I find to say? Yeah, I'm not coming. That's what they're doing right here. It's actually not so different from the excuses of all the would-be disciples that we saw back at the end of chapter 9. But here's the thing, it's incredibly disrespectful to the host. Because all of a sudden, everybody's got a higher priority. I mean, the implication is they've said yes to the initial invitation, but it turns out they don't really want to go. And now you're finding out that they don't really want to be there. So when the servant reports back to the host, what happens?
He gets mad.
He's angry. Well, you would be too, wouldn't
Yes.
you? If you had all these RSVPs and then everybody's got excuses that are really stupid. Well, why did you just tell me to start with? You didn't want to come, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, he gets angry. And then what does he do?
He tells them to go out to the alleys and whatever and bring in the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind.
That's right. And he does. The servant does. He goes out, invites all those people, and there's still room. So then what?
Go find more.
Yeah, and how does he put it? When the host tells the servant to go out, what does he tell him to do?
Compel them to come in so my house will be full.
Compel them. That's a really interesting word. Because he's going out to the roads, the countrysides, and if you just find somebody walking down the road and you're like, hey, there's this banquet, come. They'd probably be like, who are you and why am I coming?
Yeah.
The picture is you might actually have to take hold of their hand and compel them to come. And that's what the servant's doing, is he's going out and he's taking hold of people and saying, come on, come on, come on. He's compelling them to come in to this banquet. And the banquet's going forward as planned. It's going to be a full house. But the original invitees are not going to be any part of that.
That poor servant. How obnoxious he must have looked.
Okay, now what does this parable have to do with the man's original comment about the kingdom of, the feast in the kingdom of God?
Well, in the verse 12, the parable of the great banquet, if I was a Pharisee, I'd say, oh, well, I'm good because I invited you, Jesus, and you're poor. And then he goes on to say, but I'm inviting you to the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying, no,
That's right.
I'd rather eat with all these other important people.
Yes, which is interesting based on verse 15. The Pharisees assume they're in. And I think Jesus is telling them right here, no, you're not. No, you're not. If they think they're going to be present at God's table, Jesus is challenging that assumption with this parable. Because here's the thing. They're sitting at the table with the Messiah right at this moment. God, who is the host of the ultimate banquet, he is there in person at their dinner party, and how are they treating him?
He's probably sitting in the lowest place,
And what were they doing to him at the beginning of the chapter?
watching.
Trying to trap him.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been doing this over and over and over. In fact, I think that's why he got invited on the Sabbath, was because they were trying to trap him. They're treating him with pride and contempt. And of course, the fullness of the kingdom of heaven is still to come. But the kingdom is already present now, and the invitation is open to them now because Jesus is right there. He's the host of the heavenly banquet. He's holding an invitation out to them, and they're rejecting him. They assume they're assured a place at God's table, but they're rejecting the invitation because they're rejecting the host himself. And if they persist in doing that, Jesus says they're going to see other people benefit from it in their place. They're going to see the people they don't expect, the people they wouldn't think would even get invited to that party. That list in the parable, when he says, go, the servant's told, go out, invite these people, the crippled, the poor, the blind, the lame. Does that list sound familiar? Mm-hmm. It should, because Jesus used that exact same list in the parable right before this. God invites to his table people who cannot reciprocate. He invites people who don't benefit him in any way. God does not extend hospitality at his table to the people who make him look good. That's not what it's about. He invites the broken, the helpless, the unclean, the destitute, the outsiders, the Gentiles. That's what salvation by grace looks like. That's exactly how Jesus' own ministry has looked all through the book of Luke. Because Jesus is doing this day after day after day, inviting to the kingdom banquet the people who cannot reciprocate. I mean, this parable, it's also, I think, a variation on the theme from chapter 13, that when the door's shut, the opportunity to enter will be gone. And here's the invitation to come to the banquet, but it's not going to be held out to them forever. Now, here's the answer, I think, to that question from the previous two parables. How do you get at the root of pride and not just the symptom? Grace. Grace is what replaces pride with humility. Grace replaces entitlement with thankfulness. Grace replaces greed with generosity. Because when you understand that it's only the broken, the helpless, the unclean, the destitute, the outsiders, the undeserving who get invited to God's banquet, when God has to compel you to come in, that changes everything about how you understand your place at that table. When you realize that God came looking for you because that's his nature, that he took your hand and he brought you in, that you don't deserve to be there, but you have a place reserved for you because of his grace, then instead of feeling smug that you're there, you're looking around and thinking, how did I get in? Right? I mean, and think about this. If you're one of those people, who's just walking down the road and you're not even wearing clean clothes, and somebody comes along and they grab your hand and they say, come to this banquet, you're like, you don't know who I am. Like, why are you inviting me? And they compel you to come in. And then they seat you at this banquet, and it's amazing. There's amazing food. It's just, and you're sitting there at this banquet. Would you then start looking around and thinking, you know what? I deserve a better seat than that person. No, you'd be like, I don't even deserve to be here. I hope nobody notices that I've got a better seat than I should have. Like you're just grateful to be there. It doesn't even register for you that there's a pecking order and you should be seated higher or lower. It does. It humbles you. And then you also don't look around at the person sitting next to you and say, how'd you get in? Right? You would look at the person next to you and be like, you too? You got in too? How'd you get in? Because, I'm not supposed to be here, but you're not either. And how did we get in? And isn't this amazing? And then once you start thinking, you know what? I know some other people who would like to be at this banquet. I wonder if I could go find some other people and bring them in too. Because if this banquet's open to everybody, man, oh man, right? That's the total opposite of the attitude of the Pharisees. Because grace levels it. Grace means you sit down at that table and you don't think I deserve to be here. You think I don't deserve to be here, but what a gracious God I have that he included me. You don't assume that you should have a better seat. You assume you shouldn't even be at the table. But what an amazing thing that God has included you in his kingdom. That's why it's important not to read the three parables as separate sections that stand alone. With those three parables that Jesus tells, they're intended to be read in a sequence. Because the punchline is the third parable, and the punchline is grace. This is what will free all of those religious leaders from the bondage that they are in. How do you get loose of the bondage of pride? Grace. By realizing that everything you have comes to you by grace. I mean, in the larger context, think about this against the backdrop of that man that Jesus healed at the beginning. It turns out that man, who clearly didn't fit in with the other guests, and I think he was just a plant who was intended to trap Jesus. Turns out that's exactly the kind of man that God himself would invite to his table in order to heal him and free him and feed him in ways far greater than any kind of physical relief. The Sabbath is a day that's intended to proclaim that God, works on our behalf to do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. So what Jesus did was to use the Sabbath for its intended purpose, to put on full display the grace of God that invites people to take their seat at a banquet they otherwise would have no access to, and to enjoy his hospitality, his provision, and his liberation. Imagine if all the guests at the dinner party were replaced by men like that guy that got healed at the beginning. That's the picture we're getting in the third parable of this banquet table that's just filled with people who clearly don't deserve to be there, but you're not earning a place there. You're invited by a God who extends his grace. So, the three banquet parables confront the pride of the religious leaders who begrudge the healing of this man. But more than that, those parables invite the religious leaders and all the other listeners to identify with the brokenness of that guy and to accept the offer of grace that's held out to them through the Messiah, Why bother telling these parables unless Jesus is inviting the Pharisees out of their bondage and into the grace that will secure for them a place at God's table? Okay, now, the scene changes in verse 25 because now Jesus is going to turn specifically to the crowds. So I'm assuming here he's left the banquet table, he's traveling around, there are these big crowds that are traveling with him, and Jesus is going to do a little church shrinkage seminar right here. He's going to pare down the bandwagon, so to speak. So what does he say to the crowds in 25 to 27?
If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple.
Mm-hmm. What does he mean by that? Are you supposed to hate your family?
You're not
Do you think that's what he's getting at?
No,
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 I think that he's saying that you're not supposed to love them more than you love me.
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, your highest affection should be Jesus. Jesus has to be your essential identity, and he has to be your highest priority. So if loyalty to Jesus comes in conflict with loyalty to your family, who gets your loyalty? Jesus does. And it, you know, the people who are hearing this, particularly the disciples, but lots of other people too, they're going to have to face this difficulty. They're going to have to make some choices between some of the people they love and Jesus. And Jesus makes it clear he is the highest priority.
Our love for God should be such that it should be so amazing that our love for other people look like hate. Looks like hate.
In the sense that that's where your full allegiance is, right? Yeah. And here's the thing, who has the right to demand that kind of allegiance from you? God. God is the only one who has the right to do that. Luke 14:26 is basically the first commandment in different language. It's Jesus issuing the first commandment and saying, oh, it's me. When the first commandment says, have no other gods before me, that's what Jesus is saying right here. Have no other gods before him. Yeah, nobody can demand that kind of loyalty from us but God, and that's what Jesus does. And then he adds that whoever does not carry his cross and follow him cannot be his disciple. And a cross isn't just a burden you carry around, it's an instrument of death. Jesus is headed toward the cross, and if you're going to be a disciple of his, you have to know being a disciple is going to be costly. Anyone who's not willing to let Jesus have your whole life, to put your entire life at his disposal, Jesus says you can't be his disciple if you're not willing to do that. You can't follow with one foot in and one foot out, as if you're going to give Jesus 50% of yourself and you're going to keep the rest for, you. No, he gets all of it. He has the right to all of you because of who he is.
That goes right along with what you were talking about with pride too, because the cross is not a noble death.
Right.
That was for the worst criminal.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yep. And if Jesus is going to suffer and be humiliated, do you think his disciples are going to be spared all of that?
No.
Okay, now what does he add in 28 to 33?
Counting the cost.
Mm-hmm. So what are the images that he uses, the illustrations he gives right here?
if you're gonna build a tower, you determine the cost and see if you have enough to build it.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of use your common sense.
That's right. Because if you lay a foundation for a building you can't finish, you look like an idiot, right?
If you start it and run out of money, then people will ridicule you.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And so, it's like, then the next verse, it
Mhm.
says, if this army comes at you with 20,000 men, a king with 20,000 men, you only
Mhm.
have 10,000, like, get a grip.
That's
You
right.
can't do it,
Yeah,
give up, and I don't know where it goes from there.
right. Now what's the point of those two illustrations?
Be prepared
For what?
for the coming of the second coming.
Well, and
But they
consider,
didn't really know about the second coming yet.
right,
Yeah.
but now connect this to what he just said to all of these crowds. Because he just demanded total allegiance. He said, you know, you can't be my disciple if you're not willing to hand over everything. And I think right now he's following that up by saying, okay, don't step into discipleship without knowing what you're getting into. What's it going to cost you? It's going to cost you everything. So yeah, plan ahead in the sense of don't take off on the road to discipleship thinking this is all going to be, you know, a Disney ending right here. It is going to cost you. And so consider that cost before you sign up. Now, what is Jesus doing? Is he trying to dissuade people from following him?
He's warning them what
That-
cost is.
That's right. And I think he's trying to filter out the people who are there just for the show, right? If you're just coming and hanging around Jesus because of the miracles and the spectacles and because you think, well, this must be the Messiah and victory's about to come and then we're all going to, you know, it's going to be curtains for Rome or whatever. Here's Jesus saying, no, discipleship is different than that. There's a cost to it and the cost is heavy because you hand your whole life over to him. If you're not willing to pay that price, then discipleship is not for you. Jesus is not for you. If you look at that and say the cost is too high.
Sally, it's going through my mind, I'm thinking of, especially there's been a couple of book authors that we've just all scrambled to their words. It's like the cost doesn't ever go away. It's like it's forever. As if we lose sight of the fact that we have to count the cost daily. Because these are people that you would never have guessed would stumble into adultery or get sucked up into something like that. Or none of us are like that.
That's right. It's like the parable of the sower in different words. I mean, you remember the different kinds of soil and how people start off, you know, looking good, but what is it that really demonstrates that somebody has faith? It's perseverance. Well, here's Jesus giving you the warning right up front that if you think you want to be a disciple of his, well, consider first what you're getting into before you sign up. And there's no beating around the bush. Whenever I read stuff like this, I always think, we kind of have a tendency, I think, in American evangelicalism to do evangelism in a way that downplays the cost. You know, to say, come to Jesus and you'll have your best life. Well, of course, Jesus is going to give you your best life. But that doesn't mean he's going to solve all your problems and take all of your griefs away and that this is going to be like, you know, just a rose garden from now on. Or you're going to have struggles, but they'll be short term. You know, it won't be anything too difficult. No. Jesus it's like he's saying to the crowds right now, okay, let's split up the bandwagon here. If you're not serious about the cost of discipleship, okay, just be done with this whole thing. But if you're going to be a disciple, know this is the cost. And it's the cost for everybody who wants to follow him. And then, well, the conclusion, 34 and 35, is actually related to that. Verse 34 literally begins with therefore, which not all the translations include, but it does connect these final verses to what Jesus just said. So how does he conclude in 34 and 35?
It says salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile, so it is thrown out.
That's right. So imagine you have some salt and the chemical content that makes it salty leaches out and it loses its flavor. If you had salt on your shelf that had no flavor, what would you do with it? It's like dirt, right? It's no better than dirt. And then Jesus repeats that line, whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. Now, what's he getting at right here? I think Jesus he's painting a picture of the crisis that any would-be disciple faces. Because in the context, I think salt refers to the potential disciple who jumps into the whole Jesus thing, maybe because he's popular and he's doing miracles or whatever, without taking account of what discipleship really demands. And then when the cost of following Jesus hits home, they suddenly decide, yeah, this isn't for me. Again, it's a rerun of the parable of the soils. There you have salt that lost its saltiness. And what's it good for now? Again, it's Jesus saying, don't start this if you're not going to persevere, because things are going to get difficult, and know that the cost is going to be high. If discipleship comes to nothing, there's no good that comes out of that. So he says, for those who have spiritual ears, count the cost of following Jesus, and know that perseverance is going to be required. Now, of course, there are huge blessings on the other side of that. We know the blessings are outsized. It's going to be enormous what you get from God, the grace that gets poured out on you. You have a seat at his table for eternity. But in the short term, there's going to be a cost, and Jesus wants the crowds to know that. To know that if they're following him because they think this is going to be, a party when they get to Jerusalem, that's not what's coming. Okay, do you have comments? Anything you would like to add?
In this context, Sally, would you explain verse 32?
Find 32. Well, I mean, within the parable, it's just this idea of saying, have a realistic expectation of what's coming. Because if you're not really thinking about the bigger picture, you can make a decision that, today, that you're going to completely undo tomorrow. Know what you're getting into before you get into it, and make your decision accordingly. Mm-hmm.
And Sally, I just thought of, maybe because of my background with Dave and his financial stuff, but it was like, wow, this is the vehicle of my dreams, and I don't care that it costs X amount of dollars, but until a year down the road, the payment for it,
Mm-hmm.
it just puts you in a pit. And it's kind of that kind of situation.
Okay.